alum. And first, I will begin with Caryn Grant. Caryn Grant is the Manager of Diversity and Inclusion for NASCAR, where she oversees initiatives aimed at creating an inclusive environment in all facets of the NASCAR industry and increasing awareness of and exposure to NASCAR in diverse markets and communities. Prior to joining NASCAR, Grant served as an editor and a reporter for several years. Though her main focus was sports, Grant also covered topics such as politics and education. She received her BA in Communications from Howard University and an MBA of Master of Sports Business Management from the University of Central Florida. So welcome to Caryn, everyone. And next we have Deontay Morris, who is currently a podcast editor at Spotify, where he oversees the sports and gaming verticals. His fundamental responsibility is curating listening experience to bring the Spotify user back to the platform again. In the past, Morris has worked for ESPN, Fox Sports, and Turner Sports, where he focused on TV production on shows such as ESPN's First Take, First Things First, Inside the NBA, and even SportsCenter. He's a proud graduate of Howard University, and he's from Detroit, Michigan. So everyone welcome Deontay. And now I will pass things off to Rachel Ray with the University of Florida alum.
That's awesome, Kyra. So today I have the honor of introducing Miss Jocelyn Moore, a venture partner at Ozone Ventures in New York. She also serves as the executive in residence at the Gathering Spot in Atlanta. It was actually just announced today that she was appointed to the DraftKings board of directors. So that's awesome. Congratulations. Formerly, she was the executive vice president of communications and public affairs for the NFL, where she was a key architect for the league's social justice efforts. Prior to joining the NFL, she served as managing director at Global Park Group, a national leading communication consulting firm. She also spent 15 years in the United States Senate, most recently as the deputy staff director of the Senate Finance Committee. She's also on the board of directors for the West Virginia Health System, the University of Florida Foundation, the University of Florida Alumni Association, and the DC Rape Crisis Center. She received both her BA in English and her master's in education and student personal higher education from the University of Florida. So everybody welcome Ms. Jocelyn Moore. And then next, I would like to introduce former Gator Keith Tribble, the Executive Senior Associate and Partner of Brentwood Partners, and founder and managing partner of Tricom Management Group. Keith was also the president and CEO of Jackson Health Foundation for over 6 years. He also served as the University of Central Florida Athletic Association's Executive Vice President and Athletic Director. He also served as CEO of the Orange Bowl Committee for over 13 years, where he was responsible for raising funds to support Orange Bowl programs and various community initiatives. In recognition of his outstanding work, the Orange Bowl Committee established the Keith Tribble Community Servants Excellence Award. He has also received a plethora of awards and features from companies such as Sports Illustrated and Black Enterprise Magazine. He received his Bachelor of Science in Broadcasting and Public Relations from the University of Florida. Welcome, Keith.
So today I have the pleasure in introducing our moderator, Brian Jackson. He is a proud Howard University alumnus with a degree in broadcast journalism who currently serves as a morning news anchor at WTXL TV ABC 27 in Tallahassee. Jackson got his start in journalism in high school, where he wrote for his school newspaper. During his last semester at Howard University, Jackson began interning at Comcast Sportsnet. Shortly after graduating, he was promoted to a production assistant. Over the course of a decade, Jackson moved himself further up the ladder to a digital sports reporter, producer, host, and even sideline reporter. These opportunities allowed Jackson to become a sports news anchor for WJT Florida, where he covered the Jaguars and Gators football before fulfilling his current position. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Jackson, who is going to lead us into this conversation about the elephants in the room in the sports industry. And remember, we would love for you to put your questions and comments in the chat. And we thank you all for attending tonight.
Well, yeah, I guess we can get this thing started. Man, it's just a pleasure and an honor to be here. You guys are going to do all the work as the guest today. I'm just going to kind of sit here and play point guard and just kind of set you guys up. That's the plan today. We'll get things started with, I feel like going to Howard was the most important decision that I've ever made in my entire life. Wouldn't be where I'm at this point in my career if I had not made that decision some 18 years ago to go to Howard. So I want to start with you, Jocelyn. What made you want to go to UF?
Thanks, Brian, and go Gators. I actually wanted to go to Hampton University, but I'm from Atlanta.
That's disappointing.
And, I just got to say, I'm here to tell the truth, right? And so my parents were very adamant that I stay in the state, and I got a full scholarship at the time. And I don't mention this often. I started at the University of Georgia.
Okay.
And then ended up transferring. And I will say, much like you, the University of Florida was foundational for me and a really terrific experience. But I also deeply respect, honor, and love the HBCU experience as well. So that's why I went to UF, and, I guess the rest is history, as they say. Right.
I will continue. Same thing for Deontay.
Similar to you, Brian, Howard is by far the best decision I ever made. A better decision than working for ESPN, a better decision than working for Spotify. It just gave me so much inspiration and confidence to be the best version of myself, knowing that I'm walking the same halls that Toni Morrison walked, and Thurgood Marshall and Kwame Ture, even now Kamala Harris, Chadwick Boseman. We just have so many amazing alum, and I just felt really at home, and it really nurtured my talents and allowed me to grow into the person I am today. So best decision I ever made, go Bison.
And speaking of Bison, Caryn?
Yeah, exactly. Best decision of my life. I knew from an early age that I wanted to major in journalism. And so when I was applying to colleges, that's kind of what I based those decisions on. So picked some PWI journalism schools that are really well known. But at the end of the day, knew that I really, really wanted that HBCU experience. We're here today to talk about race. I grew up in a very suburban area where I was very much the minority. And I wanted to make sure that at least for 4 years of my life, that wasn't the case. And I cherish every second of those 4 years and carry a lot of the things that I learned at Howard with me every day.
So you actually were kind of leading into my next question, the difference between going to an HBCU and a PWI. So what was that feeling like when you first stepped on campus, when you were no longer the minority for you, Caryn?
I truly felt like I was home. And I mean, I'm not a terribly cheesy person, and I know that's kind of a cheesy statement to make, but I really, truly felt like I was home. I went on a college tour as a junior in high school, and Brian and Deontay, you can kind of attest to this, but when I walked up the hill through those gates, something came over me. I don't know what it is to this day, but I truly just felt at home. And I tell people working in diversity and inclusion, the greatest level of diversity that I have seen throughout all my years was at Howard University. With it being an HBCU, there is so much diversity on that campus. You have students from the continent, you have students from the Caribbean, and even within the US, you have students from all different regions of the country. And there's so much diversity, and really shows that even within what we typically think of diversity, right, in terms of like a racial or ethnic group, there is so much diversity within that group itself. And yeah, so I loved it. And again, best decision of my life. So.
Now we're here going over sports and some of the elements in the room regarding the sports industry. At what point during your, I guess, college careers did you feel like, okay, hey, I want to maybe get into sports in some way or some fashion after I graduate? And what did you do in school that kind of led you down this path? We'll start with you, Jocelyn.
So actually, my background is not in sports. My bachelor's is in English and my master's is in education. I played sports in high school and even before high school. I was a basketball player and I ran track. But I really was bitten by the political bug when I was in college and decided that's what I wanted to pursue. So prior to getting involved in the sports space, I spent a long time working in the United States Senate. And I think all of the skills, both hard skills and soft skills that I learned, particularly being an English major, how to communicate. I mean, that's many of the folks who are on this panel and also in the audience. Those are skills that are transferable regardless of the industry that you are in. So communicating, listening, effective writing, all of those things were, skills that I learned during my time at the University of Florida. And so it wasn't until much later in my career when a mentor suggested that I apply for a job at the National Football League. I've always been a lover of sports, always will be a lover of sports, but it was really having a great mentor to encourage me to pursue the opportunity with the National Football League.
We're going to come back to mentors in just a little bit. But Caryn, same thing for you. At what point did you feel like you wanted to navigate a career in sports?
Yeah, so I grew up playing sports and knew from an early age that I wanted to work in the industry. When I worked as a journalist covering sports, some of my favorite stories were covering the stories of the athletes themselves, or even talking about how sports impacts community and vice versa, how community impacts sports. And so that's really where my passion has always been. I love watching sports. I love still playing sports when my needs will allow me today. But it really is about the personalities in sports. And a lot of what we're saying today, it's the opportunity for sports to impact change and create change in society. So that's always been kind of my passion.
Now, one of the things, this is a very interaction and open conversation. So we're obviously taking questions. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat and it'll be forwarded to me. In fact, we got one question. I'm going to give you the first one. Deontay says, what was the transition like from attending Howard or your school of choice to making that transition to your professional life? What was the biggest challenge in doing that?
Oh, that's a great question. You're basically learning how to be an adult. On top of having real life work expectations placed upon you, which is completely different than being in college, where college is what you make it, right? Like you can take 15 classes in one semester if you want. You could take one class in one semester if you want. It's really like up to you. So there's a different level of accountability and expectations. But I will say to this day, the most challenging job I've ever had was being an editor for the Hilltop, Howard student newspaper. In a good way. It forced me to grow. It forced me to motivate students who weren't being paid very much. So now that I'm at a company like Spotify, you don't need to motivate people. People have their own self-motivation. You don't have to worry about the dynamics of being in college and people going through their personal issues that you just happen to go through when you're in college. So it wasn't, and I don't want to say it was easy or a walk in the park. I definitely had to really grind. I put in a lot of hours at my first job, which is ESPN. But it was more, I felt more than prepared. Of course, there are a lot of things I had to learn, but just having eagerness, connecting with like minds, making sure that I connected with people who I knew would have my best interests that can give me valuable advice was some of the best decisions I made to help me adjust successfully from college.
Now, one thing that I first didn't really realize getting into sports is the humble beginnings financially when you first start to work in sports. In my first job at Comcast Sportsnet, I graduated from Howard. The cashiers at the grocery store, at the Safeway grocery store, they made more per hour than I did as a production assistant. So that $22,000. So for college students, that's not a lot of money living in Washington, D.C. That's what my first job paid. Can anybody share any stories on maybe some of those humble beginnings when you first started your career in sports?
Brian, can I just interject here that a career in politics is also not glamorous. I also started at $22,000 in Washington, D.C.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so I mean, working in sports is definitely a industry of passion. And one thing that anyone who makes their way into the sports industry will realize is that, you know, everyone wants to work in sports. It's seen as a dream job. And because of that, a lot of organizations can get away with paying very little because there's someone who will do the job and do a good job for that amount of pay. And the thought is that part of your pay is having the experience of working in sports, getting to stand on the sideline on Sundays and things like that. So there definitely are some things you have to give up in order to go down this path. But I don't want to speak for anyone else on the panel, but I mean, I personally wouldn't change it for the world. I love working in sports, and it's a great industry to grow in as well.
Now, this next question that we're getting from some of our students is for Jocelyn and Caryn. It says, how has your gender impacted your career, specifically and related to working in sports?
Caryn, you want me to I'll jump in. I grew up with very strong women in my family, my mom, my aunt, my grandmothers. And so they instilled in me just, as a woman, as a person, that I'm as good as anybody else in the room. So for me, I feel like my gender has been an asset in everything that I've done. You often hear that having a woman in the room or at the table makes decision-making better. I 1,000% agree with that. No offense to my male colleagues on the panel, but I think that it served me well in terms of having a, kind of a different perspective, a compassionate perspective, and just really drawing on what I learned from my mom and my auntie and my grandmothers. So I think it's only helped me in all of my roles. That's not to say that I haven't sometimes been the only woman or the only person of color in the room. But again, I've always kind of walked in the expectations that my mom and aunts and ancestors have set for me. So I've always really understood kind of, my power in the situation and in the room.
Same question for you, Caryn.
Yeah, I've actually been in an interesting situation as a woman in sports. All of my jobs, I have worked under another woman, which I think is pretty rare, having been working for about a decade now. So I definitely see that as a blessing. I know that it's rare. But I think that, as Jocelyn said, as a woman, you bring a lot to the table. And as a woman, a lot of times you're the only woman in the room. So that in itself is something that you're bringing, and just make sure that you understand that. And you definitely don't shy away. Make sure your voice is heard.
Now, looking at my screen, I'm seeing, 4 other people who look like me, same skin color, but oftentimes in sports, we're going into rooms where maybe you're the only person who looks like you. And Keith, you've had decades of experience in the sports industry. How do you handle yourself, and how do you prepare yourself for those types of situations?
Well, you're exactly right, Brian. There were, in fact, I go back many years into the sports industry, and, I was the only one in the room that looked like me, only one of color. It's been so much part of our lives and so much part of my life. I didn't dwell on it. I'm sure that those, my white counterparts noticed I was the only one in the room, and it probably, I wouldn't say it made them feel uncomfortable because, I was outnumbered. So, but I think through the years, as I progressed in my career, I really didn't pay much attention to it, because I knew at the end of the day, I had to be 3-4 times better. I had to always be on my best, always produce. And so I thought the end sum game for me in terms of the success was going to be driven by what I did anyway. Did I like it? No. But it was something that I just basically had to get used to. But and in fact, until, it still happens today that I'm the only one in the room.
Now, one thing that's been very beneficial in my career is having different mentors to kind of lead me along, who've kind of walked some of these same steps before me. So I can bring up one. His name is Chris Miller. He's a sports anchor, reporter, covers the Wizards, literally had my dream job. And one of the things he told me is, hey, when you make it years down the line, make sure that you reach back and help somebody like I'm helping you. So could all of you share maybe 1 or 2 people that have kind of impacted your career on a mentorship level that have helped prepare you to navigate this kind of tricky world in sports? Let's start with you, Jocelyn.
Sure. The person who recommended that I pursue a career with the National Football League, his name is Joel Johnson. He was my boss at the Glover Park Group at the time. And it was, something I hadn't really envisioned for myself, just because I only recently started being a lobbyist. So he was very instrumental in terms of being supportive. But something that Caryn said early on in terms of having women bosses. So when I was working in the Senate, and the reason I want to raise this here is that I had, in one particular job, all of the people in senior roles were women. And that was such a wonderful experience to just be around women who owned their power, who knew exactly what they were doing and what they were capable of. And that really kind of set the tone for me going forward from that moment in my career in terms of how I respond. And all those women, whether we're talking about Ellen Dinesky or, many of the other women that I worked with, they continue to be close friends and mentors to me even to this day. Or Melanie Nathanson. I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on.
We'll continue with Keith.
I've been in the business so long, I really didn't have any mentors that looked like me. So when I started in business, most of the mentors or those who took me under their wing were white guys. I would say they did the best they could in terms of guiding me, in terms of giving me opportunity and a chance. And I think it's from that experience that I made a point that wherever I was in a role of leadership, that I was going to mentor young men and women who looked like me. Because I basically said, if I didn't do it, who else was going to do that? And so I sort of took the same thing that you heard, Brian, was that if I'm helping you and giving you the opportunity to be mentored or to be an intern or so what that may be, you do the same thing, because you can never repay me back in dollars and cents, because that's not important. It's important that you do the same thing that I did for you. So I would say I was more of a catalyst in starting, getting it to where someone like me was sitting in a position that could do that.
Continue with you, Caryn.
Yeah, so I left my career as a journalist to go back to grad school, and I went to University of Central Florida. And the reason I did that was to attend the DeVos Sport Business Management program that is headed by Dr. Richard Lapchick, and he alone is the reason that I chose that program. And I was very particular with that choice, because I knew that I wanted to pursue my career in sports business, working in social impact, and making a change through sports. And for those of you who've never heard of Dr. Lapchick, Google the man. He's literally known as the social conscious of sports. So having the opportunity to study under him, but really just spend time with him day in and day out is something that I cherish. And I graduated from that program about 3 years ago, and we still keep in touch. And he's been a great mentor in my first steps of my second phase of my career, my new life, I like to call it. So he's been fantastic. So
now, Deontay, I think we met back when you were like interning for the Wizards way back in the days. Who was going to help you along this way over the course of your career?
So I break my mentors up into two tiers. One is like my college mentors, and one have been like the ones who picked up the torch for me professionally. In college, Mr. Edward Hill, he was a longtime sports information director at Howard. He was there for about 30 years. I think he retired 2 years ago. He's not only a Howard legend, but also just a DC legend. He led to me getting my first internship. And he was just such a great, still to this day, like a wise counsel. I can always depend on him for some sage advice. He always reaches out to me. He's like, hey, I know there's a new young kid coming up. He reminds me of you. I need you to talk to him tomorrow. Can you do it? And the answer is always yes. And also Kathy Jerome, where I met you, Brian. She was another Howard grad. She got me that Wizards internship, and I worked underneath her. But as far as professionally, I've been blessed. I worked in TV. I was a researcher and a producer. So I've worked with people on TV very closely. Chris Carter, Jamel Hill, Skip Bayless. I know he's a little controversial, but that's my dog. And Carrie Champion as well are also people who have like become like family to me, who hold me down, who reach out to me all the time and have given me a lot. So I just try to, pay it forward. And if those people can make some time for little old Deontay, I can for sure make time for anybody.
Man, that is great. It's definitely none of us would be here without some of the people that have kind of helped pave the way, and we're now trying to make sure that we do that for others. Now, we got another question from some of our students. It says, can any of you talk about an experience that you've had that made you either uncomfortable or that you felt was inappropriate in the workplace? And how did you handle that situation? And how would you suggest that a student handle that same situation if they find themselves involved with something like that?
You called on somebody, Brian?
Anybody who wants to jump in.
I'll talk about one. I was at work the night that the Trayvon Martin case against George Zimmerman, the night that verdict came out. I was at work, and there was a coworker there who cheered that George Zimmerman was being exonerated or was not found guilty, what have you. And that made my blood boil. Obviously, it was a horrible experience, and I confronted him. And that's probably not y'all shouldn't do that. That's not the best way to go about things because you're angry about something that it was a middle-aged white guy, something that he can never relate to, and he can't even come close to finding a middle ground or being compassionate in that moment. So that was a learning moment. I realized that there are people who you think are liberal who are on your side, but don't have the same sensibilities that you do. And I always say, protect your peace. You have coworkers, they're not your family. You can go home and, talk to people and vent to people who have your best interests at heart. But in the workplace, you have to be civil. You don't have to be buddy-buddy with somebody, but you do have to treat them with common courtesy. And that was one of the big lessons I learned. And I am happy that I've learned that early in my career. And thankfully, that hasn't been an issue, nothing that dramatic. But it was very jarring coming from Howard and, working in a predominantly white place. That was like one of the experiences that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth.
Now, honestly, we're having this session today, and we just got news about the Breonna Taylor case a couple of hours ago. So when you have something like this, obviously we work in sports, but we're still people. So how do you kind of separate, maybe micromanage your emotions and not let that get involved with the job? Do you have any tips for students on how to kind of separate the two?
Well, I think it's difficult. It's certainly difficult today, more difficult today than it has been in the past. And I would say if this was 5-10 years ago, I would even probably address it a little different, then than I would today. And I think today it's almost as if we have been given a license to really talk about how we feel and don't allow things to go by that we probably would have allowed to go by because we wanted to be really politically correct. And I'm a strong believer in exercising the opportunities to be politically correct, but not that at the expense that it changes who you are or gets to the soul of who you are. And I think that's the thing I would really push now is if it really cuts you to the core, if it really gets to you, then you really need to explain it in a way that's respectful, but yet is impactful that whomever you're explaining it to understands where you're coming from. Because unless we start clear conversations and really telling the story that we want to be told in the way we want to be told, and not having other folks tell it for us, that's the only way we're going to get people to hear us and to hear what our frustrations are and to hear the things that we believe we can accomplish but haven't had a chance to do it. So I would say it's changed now. I mean, again, 5-10 years ago, I've probably been different, but today I'm probably more not letting things go by.
Now, Keith, you mentioned that things are changing, and one of the biggest reasons for that is sports. So in your guys' opinion, what do you feel like the role that sports has had in maybe moving that conversation forward to maybe people are having conversations at dinner that they weren't having 5-10 years ago? Caryn, what do you think the role that sports has had in kind of moving that conversation forward?
Well, I think we always have looked to sports as a place for entertainment. I think that's even more so the case now that we're in the midst of a pandemic and we have a lot more free time on our hands to sit in front of TVs. And so that factor alone allows for athletes and sports organizations to kind of disrupt that safe space that people think of sports as. And obviously, we saw that a few weeks ago with the NBA and WNBA and other leagues following their role after that. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of athletes finding their voice. I think a lot of athletes are still figuring out exactly what they want that voice to be and how they want to use it. But that's something that I'm really proud of and inspired by is that you have more and more athletes stepping up and refusing to, for lack of a better term, shut up and dribble or, shut up and play. They're really using their platforms. And you're seeing that across the board, even in NASCAR, which is frankly something that I wouldn't have thought would have happened last year. So, which is great. So.
Another one of our questions says, what are your experiences with microaggressions in the industry? Sometimes things aren't maybe overtly racist or anything like that. I can share one example. I was traveling with the Jaguars to an away game, and I'm carrying a tripod, and somebody just basically assumed that I was the photographer, and my actual photographer was the reporter, just because he was white and I was black. And it shouldn't bother you. It's just kind of one of those things. I'm one of those people that just kind of shrugs things off. Like, I'm pretty sure they didn't mean anything by it. But what other types of like little things that kind of just needle at you a little bit have you guys kind of experienced over your course of working in sports? We'll start with you, Jocelyn.
Oh man, Brian, you're throwing me the softballs here. Can I, before I answer the question about microaggressions, which I want to get to, can I underscore the point that Caryn made? I think the athletic activism has been amazing. Seeing athletes day in and day out, they're really the voice of leadership in our country. And where years ago, where we'd see it as, we see athletes maybe responding, in separate demonstrations far and in between. Maybe it's one at the Olympics. Now it's not the exception, it's the rule. We see in every sport, there are athletes who are speaking up and speaking out about social injustice. We can talk about the US Open. We can talk about the NFL. We can talk about the NBA. We can talk about NASCAR, to Caryn's point. And so I think it's a wonderful thing in our country to have athletes using their platform to really speak out on all these issues and keep them top of mind. So when we're not in the COVID-19 pandemic, every time there's a sporting event on, I foresee that athletes will continue to show solidarity and activism around these critical issues facing our country. And so I just want to, give a quick shout out to all the athletes who are, involved, who are leading, who are really expressing their concern about social injustices. In terms of microaggressions, man, I'm going to go back to what Keith said earlier. I've been working for 20 years, and the term microaggressions, I think for a long time, there are things that we experienced that we didn't know what to call it, right? There'd be things that people would say or do, and it kind of just made you feel terrible. And you're like, would you say that to someone who didn't look like me? No, you wouldn't. Would you suggest, this thing? Or there are so many examples of microaggressions I think we probably all can relate to over our career. It's things like, oh, you speak so well, or you're so articulate, which is my favorite one, meaning not favorite. I get that so much. Oh, you speak so well. What? So that's one. It's also commentary about how you look or how you dress. And that's still happening. We just had an incident. It was an NFL game where an African-American woman, there was a gentleman, I forgot what station he worked for, made a totally inappropriate comment about what she was wearing at a game. And so it's the microaggressions along gender lines, along race lines, and of course, the two mixed together, they continue to happen. And now, to Keith's point, where, years ago, we kind of were just like, man, this happened, and we go home and tell our family and our friends. Now it's about that accountability piece and really trying to educate in ways that are civil, but also that let people know this behavior is not okay. You can't say this. And here's why you can't say this. Here's the impact. But more importantly, it is wrong.
Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Compared to some of your peers, how would you kind of assess? It's hard not to compare yourself to, you see this person, you look at their resume, you look at your resume, maybe they're in the place that you want to be and you feel like you should be there. Compared to some of your peers, how would you say it's been easier or maybe harder to climb the corporate ladder as you're navigating your way through sports? Caryn, want to start?
Sure. So, personally, again, I kind of shifted careers, which has been an interesting scenario to go through. So I think for me, what has helped is that I've been able to show that my background in communications and journalism is still an asset in the things that I'm doing today, working in diversity and inclusion. As we all know, diversity and inclusion touches every aspect of everything that we do and of an organization. But a lot of my job has to do with working with different communities that we race in terms of like markets, and then also messaging, right? And making sure that messaging is clear, making sure that messaging is direct, and making sure that messaging is consistent across the board. And so I think that that has helped me in my transition and moving up the ranks in terms of my career trajectory. But I mean, I'm always just cheering on the folks that have come up through the ranks with me. And I try to surround myself with folks who are doing big things, because that only motivates me to do more. Like I'm cheering you on, but I'm also trying to catch you, frankly. So
I got another question I'll throw out there for the group. From what you thought you might be doing in undergrad for a career, how is that completely different now? Maybe 10 or however long you are into your career. I can say for myself, if you would have told me that I would be doing news instead of sports, I would have said there was absolutely no way. But one of the things I ran into is that a lot of executives told me that, frankly, there's not a lot of African-American male news anchors. So this is something that you should consider, and you could probably have a better chance of moving up within the industry if you go this route instead of sports, because there's a million Black brothers trying to do sports. So how would you say that your current role is maybe different, or maybe it is exactly what you thought it was going to be when you were leaving undergrad? I want to start with you, Deontay.
Man, it's drastically different. Like to me now, Spotify is a tech company that is like dabbling in media now, as opposed to my other roles where they're like traditional sports media companies. So when I was leaving undergrad, Spotify was barely even a thing. And so just to see how it's grown and changed and how much the industry has shifted and changed since I graduated has been very interesting to see. But to me, that's the most important thing, is you kind of you want to have like an end goal a little bit, but don't make it too defined, because there are a lot of ways to achieve success. And that way you can kind of be loose about how you get to it. I know when I first started at ESPN, I was like, this is where I'm going to retire. I'm going to work here for 25 years. I had my whole track planned out. This is what I want to do. I want to do boom, 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 boom. And then after year one, living in Bristol, Connecticut, where like I could go like a couple days without seeing another Black person, I was like, this might not be it for me for 25 years, but I'm going to make the best out of it and, you know, kind of see what happens. And yeah, you just continue to, one, most importantly, like network. Like I knew Caryn and Brian even way before this panel. And also to make sure networking is a two-way street. So you don't always want to be reaching out to somebody, asking them for something. What can you provide for them? And I know you guys are probably thinking like, hey, I'm a college student. Deontay, what could I really provide you? Maybe you saw something on my LinkedIn and you're like, hey, maybe you should, well, I'll say this. This is something about my LinkedIn. I don't have job descriptions in there, mainly because I'm just being too lazy to update it. But I do have it on my resume. It's simple copy and paste. So maybe you're looking at my LinkedIn. I got an outdated headshot. You're like, Deontay, why don't you, there's a photographer in New York who does nice headshots. Maybe you should reach out to him. Maybe you're a photographer. There are a lot of different things. There are a lot of older people who aren't great on social media. Maybe you could teach them how to be on TikTok. Just make sure every situation is a value add. And that's how you make mentorships like really long lasting and not just one-off conversations. And there's actually a coworker that I worked with at ESPN. He's actually a HBCU grad as well from Delaware State. He referred me for this job that I have now at Spotify. And he actually when he referred me at first, he told me I should apply. And I read the job description. I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. And then he was like, no, like you really need to like look at this. And he kind of had to convince me to do it. And then I interviewed and I was like, the job description didn't match what the interview process was. And I was like, okay, now this is perfect. I see why he recommended me. And that's the power of having a great network. And that's the power of being flexible about getting to where you want to go and about, you know, continuing to challenge yourself and push yourself.
One thing I was told a long time ago is your network equals your net worth. So make sure that you are definitely following with the right people. It's a funny story with my current role as a news anchor here. I didn't want the job at first either. But my friend who I met many years ago at a National Association of Black Journalists TV short course when I was still an undergrad, he happened to go to undergrad with my current news director. And he told me, hey, she's looking for a morning show news anchor. And he asked me, was I interested? I told him absolutely not. He sent her my work anyway. And as you know, here it goes. A month or two later, here I am. I come on the interview and I say, oh, okay, maybe this isn't exactly what I thought. So obviously, thank goodness for having a network, people who may see something in you that you don't even see in yourself. Now, we're going to get back to you, Jocelyn. Now, you've worked in politics, the NFL, you've been a lobbyist, and you just accepted a brand new role today. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. As of today, I have joined the board of directors at DraftKings. And the thing I'd really like to convey about that is it's really in reflection to something else that we heard this week. We had the CEO of one of the largest financial institutions in America talking about, we can't hire more diverse people, more Black people, because, there aren't enough who are qualified, was essentially his argument. We can't find Black people who can work at our bank. The reason I want to highlight that is because that is simply not true, as everyone here knows. And for DraftKings as a company, not only am I joining their board today, there's also another African-American woman joining their board. And Michael Jordan just signed on as an equity partner and board advisor a couple of weeks ago. So I want to just focus on authenticity, intentionality. There is no excuse. There is no reason for every corporation at every job to make sure that they reflect the diversity of America. There are qualified candidates across the spectrum in every field that are, looking for these opportunities. So I just shout out to DraftKings. And my job, it's very new. It's, hours old. I will be a board director, really advising a company that's innovated in the daily fantasy space. If any of you play fantasy football, they are also really the leading company as far as legalized sports betting. So I'm super excited about the business opportunity, but I'm even more excited about the intentional action of creating a diverse board and, providing this opportunity and really working to make sure that the company supports social change and racial equality in America.
Now, this next question is going to be for you, Keith. Why do you feel like it was important for you to be here today? And what is it that you hope our students who are watching, and they'll watch the replay of this as well, what are you hoping that they take away from this conversation that we're all having?
Well, first of all, I hope that they take away that we've made some progress in terms of how we define that elephant in the room. But we are not there yet. And there's a lot of work to be done. And hopefully by these conversations and continued conversations that we begin to find those little tidbits here or there that can help us and help each one of them as they articulate through their various endeavors in the future, now and in the future. But I do want to add something on what Jocelyn said, because probably the biggest pet peeve I've had in business is that saying that we can't find qualified African Americans. And you put that on one side and you put the other side that says, I'm a corporation and I try to market to African Americans, but I don't have anyone on the table or anyone in my that looks like them. So those two just don't really jive and have never jived with me. So I think now is the time for all of us, and especially those of you who are students and those of you who are younger, who now are really leading this charge of change, is to demand and say, why do I have to go through this long gauntlet of experience when my counterpart, my white counterpart in most cases, never had to do that? It's so prominent in sports. As you noted, I've been an athletics director, and I can tell you how many African-American coaches today that have paid the dues and have never had a chance to be a head coach because they're not qualified, they're not whatever it is. That has to stop. We have the demand that we have just as much right. We go to great schools like Howard, University of Florida. We're educated. We have experience. We can play the corporate game just as well as anyone else. So do the right thing in saying, if you want to have diversity, if you want to have everyone at the table, if you want to represent everyone in this country, be diverse. Have us on the table. Have us have head coaches. Always said is that a black head coach has just as much right to get fired as a white head coach. So give us a chance to be fired if that's so be it. Right. We won't. But so I hope that when we take from this is that we really have this conversation, take the little things that we said today, and use it in as they go on.
Now, one thing I'm going to point out that you said, Keith, is playing the game. That's something that you don't really learn in class. So this one's going to be for you, Caryn and Deontay. What does that mean to you, and how do you kind of navigate that throughout your career? Because, like I said, this isn't something that you can just open up a book and turn to page 125 and learn how to navigate some of the behind-the-scenes conversations at work and as you're trying to climb the career ladder.
Yeah. So, I think for me, the first step of playing the game is understanding your strengths and being very unapologetic of what you bring to the table and knowing that and being able to vocalize that and show that. But then also being willing to put yourself in some of those uncomfortable situations where maybe you are the only person only person of color in the room or the only woman in the room, and things like that. And that should not be the case. And hopefully we'll continue to grow to a point where that won't be the case. But, as someone put out in the chat, folks are networking, and a lot of times it's who you know, and sports is a very, very small industry. There is some talk in the chat about organizations like NABJ, and really, so even if you don't have that representation within your organization, being a part of those professional groups that are explicitly made for us is so important. And it's really I'm not a member of NABJ now that I've hung up my journalist hat, but I still get to attend NABJ with NASCAR, which I love. And it really is like a family reunion. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like, people look out for the people that they know and that they've watched grow from college students with NABJ and things like that. So I think while we have to play the game, we have ways of playing our game too. And I think you have to find kind of a mix of the two of those things to really get the optimal benefit.
Deontay, what would you share with students in order to learn how to kind of safely navigate this career ladder?
Yeah, it definitely takes some social gymnastics navigating these career waters. But the most important thing, you have to do things in the right order of operations, just like his math class, right? So the first thing is you have to create value. Why are you important? And establish your personal brand before you can do anything else. So you have to be great at your job. You can't be average. You can't be missing deadlines. You can't be sending emails or reports with typos or wrong formulas in Excel spreadsheets. You have to be proficient and excellent at your job first. And also, too, I know y'all are college students. Y'all don't have jobs yet. You can create value. You live in the internet era. Like right now, you could download the app called Anchor and create a podcast. I could upload this as a podcast. Then you can tweet it out. You could post it on Facebook. You can post it on IG, Snapchat, LinkedIn. You guys have the world is your oyster, and you have a lot of different ways to create value for yourself before you're even stepping foot into a corporate office. So definitely take advantage of all those opportunities. And also be you. Being fake is exhausting. I'm not changing my hair. I'm not changing my tone. I'm Deontay from Detroit. I'm a Howard grad. You know I'm coming in black. Act accordingly, and we're going to get through this. I provide value. You provide value. Let's get to the commonalities. What can we do for each other? And is this a good fit? And to me, I'm blessed and fortunate to be at the point in my career where I'm not going to a company that's not a good cultural fit. I'm not going to a company where I feel like I have to be on eggshells. And, I am happy to be at a company where they do care about investing in their black employees. They do know we don't have enough black employees. They do know we need more C-suite representation, especially because they're profiting tremendously off Black culture and Black music. And these are issues that I did not have to raise, that people were aware of. And that's all you can ask. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
That's actually one of the questions that was actually sent in. Has anybody had to maybe change their hair or their appearance in order to fit a role or fit in at for a particular job? I know for me, I had to cut my beard when I got to my first job in Jacksonville. Had a beard on my resume tape, interview, was there for a month, and my news director was like, I need you to cut off your beard. Just so that I could meet their standard of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Has anybody else had to kind of go through that? And if so, what would you say to our students how do you find that balance between being yourself, but also like, man, this is a really great opportunity. How do you find the balance between those two? Anybody want to jump in and tackle that one?
I'll let the ladies tackle it. I mean, I have quarantine hair and I'm trying to grow a beard. It ain't working though. I feel like it's a little bit different for you all.
That's interesting.
I've never been asked to change my hair. I actually was I purposely wore my hair like this, curly and natural, on my interview with NASCAR. Granted, my boss also, she has locks. So I also knew that going into it. But I wanted to make sure that if there was going to be any issue with me wearing my hair like this, that we found out that was an issue up front. And then, then we just don't need to meet in the middle, and I don't need to be employed here if that's, the offer that you want to make. So I've never been asked to change my hair. I do go back and forth between wearing my hair like this and sometimes I'll wear it in braids. And, you get some folks who don't understand that back and forth. So that's always an interesting dynamic. But I have had last summer, I believe we had an intern who was interviewing and she made a comment that she felt like she had to straighten her hair before her interview. Like no one told her this. She actually had friends on the outside that she asked a bunch of folks and a lot of people told her she should straighten her hair before going into her interview. And this was minutes before her interview. So I didn't have the conversation with her, you shouldn't have done that. You need to be yourself right then and there. But I think that it's important for those of us who are established in companies, when we do hear things like that, make sure that we handle it internally. So if I hear, a colleague say something about someone who has locks or is wearing their hair natural, then I will go confront them and say, okay, explain to me what's the issue. I don't understand.
Keith, we'll go to you for this one. If you could go back to yourself, put yourself in your undergrad shoes, what do you wish that you knew then that you knew now about working in sports? I'm going to give this one to everybody so y'all can start working on your responses.
Well, I can honestly say that when I came out of school and I really wanted to get into sales, and I wanted to eventually, be around sports and somehow. Might have been working at ESPN, might have been at Nike or whatever that may be. And I thought because I came out of sports that the whole world would just love me, would love, me as this, as Deontay says, this black guy. I'm coming here black. And I found out that my sporting world was this bubble that everyone cheered for me on Saturdays and everyone loved me. And, but when I took off that uniform and when I went out into the quote real world, it wasn't the same. I didn't get a chance to get that job. I didn't get a chance to be, and so it was much harder than I would have anticipated because I'm coming from sports. And I think a lot of part of my career, I wouldn't say wasted some time, but I went after some things and chased some things that never were going to happen because I was black. Just weren't going to happen. And I think if I'd have known that, using my sports as that was going to be my entree, I probably would have gone as something where, they didn't care what you look like as long as your bottom line produced something, in terms of sales. So that's probably what I would have done differently.
Same for you, Jocelyn. I think you got to take yourself off mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Am I off mute now? Sorry about that.
Yeah, we
I
got
think
you.
what I wish I would have known, and this goes back to something Deontay was saying earlier, is the importance of continuing to have a thriving, supportive, nurturing environment and, kind of your kitchen cabinet, if you will, outside of work. Because we have to do our jobs and be 10 times better than our counterparts, sometimes we spend so much time at work and working on work and thinking about work and strategizing around work that we can miss all of the critical components of life that have nothing to do with work. And so I would just say, don't make work your life. Continue to have that support system outside of work, not only friends, family, but your kitchen cabinet. So maybe it's the folks who've been in your shoes, who've had the same type of job that you've had, that you can go to talk about, if you're having, concerns or issues, or just to share in the joy, the successes, as well as the times when maybe you don't achieve everything you want to achieve. So I would just say, I wish I would have, not spent so much time working on work and thinking about work and strategizing about work. But, going forward, I certainly won't do that. And I advise students to just continue to maintain your safe space outside of work.
Same for you, Caryn. What do you wish that you knew before you walked across the stage?
So I'm still very much working on that point that Jocelyn just made, because one of the things that I was going to say that I wish I knew is that, like, working in sports is tough. It's a lot of long hours, and that's true. But taking that time out for yourself to maintain your health and your sanity and all that is so important. But in addition to that, what I wish I would have known is just how broad and wide-reaching sports is. And this is something that I tell our interns, or anytime I get to talk to college students, is yes, you can work for the NBA, you can work for the NFL, you can work for NASCAR, you can work for the teams within those entities, but you can also work for the likes of a Spotify, as you see Deontay. You can work for Coca-Cola as one of our major partners as well. So just don't limit yourself. Even if you do work with like a traditional sports organization, like I encourage folks to give NASCAR a try, obviously. But even beyond like sports organizations, there's so much you can do within sports outside of what we typically think of as sports.
And we're going to wrap up with you, Deontay. You get to put a nice big bow on this.
Well, shout out to Caryn. Yes, come work at Spotify. Come to Death Row. Make sure y'all listen and subscribe and check us out. Back to my earlier point, networking. Jocelyn and Keith are going to be getting emails from me, and I'm going to reconnect with Brian and Caryn how I should have. Definitely make sure you're on your networking tip. Yes. But also, too, what I would tell my younger self is just I wish I would have dreamed bigger and bolder. For me, I was trying to get to ESPN. And I did that when I first graduated. And that's not to brag or to boast, but that just means I set the bar too low for my personal self. And I kind of didn't believe enough. I wish in hindsight I would have made something like House of Highlights that Omar Raja did. And now he's a millionaire. He's like 25, and he became that off of Instagram. And it was an ingenious idea. So shout out to him. But I just wish I would have dreamed a little bit bigger. Your jobs will change, but your support system doesn't. So make sure that you nurture those relationships and know that a company doesn't make you or doesn't break you. I'm going to be Deontay Morris with or without Spotify. And you guys are going to be who you are with or without Company X. So definitely keep that in mind and, make sure that you hold yourself to the highest standards.
Yeah, and I'll wrap up with saying that I would tell students to be open to a path that doesn't look like the plan that you have mapped up in your head, because more than likely it's not going to work out exactly the way that you have it mapped out. Point A to B, you're probably going to be more like A to Z, back to J to E, F, and above. But definitely make sure that you surround yourself with great people that are uplifting, and it'll all work itself out in the end, because it always does. And with that, we are going to wrap this up for today. Just want to thank Caryn, Deontay, Jocelyn, and Keith. You guys have been tremendous, been able to give these students valuable tips, hopefully that they can go back and send this video out to some of their friends And we're just getting started here with the first Elephant in the Room panel series. This one was focused around sports. Now, looking ahead, our next series is going to be slated for Wednesday, October the 7th. It's going to be the same time between 4 and 5. That one will face the elephants in the room surrounding politics. Now, that is going to be an interesting topic. Sure, we're just 6 weeks away from Election Day there. And joining our panel will be a new set of alumni from HU as well as UF, ready to answer all of your student questions. So make sure that you tell your friends to register now. And don't forget to fill out the survey for a chance to win a $25 Amazon gift card. I'm sure that could always come in handy for all of us. But with that, we're going to wrap things up. It is 5 o'clock. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Great job, Brian. Thank you. Thank you guys for having us.
Great job, Brian.
Great job, everybody. Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Yes.
See y'all soon.
That's right.
Yes.